What if the most powerful force in the entire universe is not money, not strength, not intelligence, but a single quiet thought inside your own mind? Curious. What if I told you that a 68-year-old woman who lost her husband, her home, and her health, all in the same year, managed to rebuild everything using nothing but one simple shift in how she thought? No medicine, no money, no miracle. Just one decision about where she pointed her mind every single morning. If that sounds impossible, stay with me, because by the end of this story, you will never think about your own problems the same way again. Inspirational. And if stories like this speak to your soul, subscribe right now, because every week I bring you a true story that will quietly change something inside you. Her name was Eleanor. She was 68 years old, and she lived in a small town in rural Tennessee. Her house was not fancy. White paint peeling on the porch, a garden out front with tomatoes and sunflowers, a wooden rocking chair where she sat every evening watching the fireflies. But it was hers. And she had filled it with 44 years of marriage to a man named George. George was a carpenter, quiet, steady, the kind of man who fixed things without being asked. He repaired the neighbor's fence after the storm. He built a bookshelf for the school teacher down the road. He never asked for anything in return. He just believed that a good life was built one small act at a time. Eleanor and George had raised 3 children in that house. They had weathered hard winters and dry summers and 2 recessions and the kind of ordinary grief that visits every family eventually, but they had always had each other. Then one April morning, George did not wake up. Heart attack. Peaceful, the doctor said, in his sleep. As if that was supposed to make it easier, Eleanor sat in his chair in the kitchen for 3 days. She did not eat. She barely spoke. Her children flew in from different states and sat around her in worried silence, not knowing what to say to a woman whose entire world had just become past tense. But here is what nobody knew. Here is what Eleanor never told anyone until years later. On the 3rd night, sitting alone in the dark kitchen at 2 a.m., she heard something. Not a voice, not a ghost, just a memory. George's voice in her head from a conversation they had decades ago when she had been going through something hard, and he had sat beside her and said very quietly, "Eleanor, you cannot control what happens to you, but you can always, always control where you point your mind next. That is the one thing nobody can ever take from you." She had almost forgotten those words. But grief has a way of surfacing exactly the thing you need to hear at exactly the right moment. She sat with those words in the dark for a long time. Then she got up, made herself a cup of tea, and for the first time since George died, she thought one small positive thought. Not that everything was okay. It was not okay. Not that she was not in pain. She was in tremendous pain. Just one small thought. George had a good life. He was loved. He died peacefully. Not everyone gets that. It was a tiny shift, like turning a ship 1 single degree. But that 1 degree, held consistently, leads to an entirely different destination. Now here is where the science comes in. And this is important because what Eleanor did instinctively is something that neuroscientists have spent decades studying. In 2005, the National Science Foundation published research showing that the average human being has between 12,000 and 60,000 thoughts per day. And of those thoughts, 80% are negative, 80%, and 95% are the exact same thoughts repeated from the day before. Your brain, left to its own devices, is a machine that replays fear, worry, and regret on a loop. Not because you are broken, because your brain evolved to scan for threats. It kept your ancestors alive by always asking, what could go wrong next? But here is what they also found. The brain is not fixed, it is plastic. It rewires based on what you repeatedly think. Every time you choose a positive thought over a negative one, you strengthen a neural pathway. Do it enough times, and your brain actually changes its default setting. Dr. Barbara Fredrickson at the University of North Carolina discovered what she called the broaden and build theory. When people experience positive emotions, even small ones, even forced ones at first, their minds literally open up. They see more solutions, they make better decisions, they build more resilience. The effect compounds over time. Eleanor did not know any of this science. She was a 68-year-old woman from Tennessee who had never read a psychology paper in her life, but she knew George's words, and she chose to use them. Every morning from that day forward, Eleanor made herself do one thing before she got out of bed. She lay still for 5 minutes and she thought of 3 things she was grateful for. Not big things, small things. The sunlight on the curtain, the smell of coffee, the sound of birds outside, the fact that her body still worked well enough to stand up. Some mornings it felt ridiculous. Some mornings she was crying before she even finished the list, but she did it anyway. Then she got up, made her tea, sat in George's chair, not to mourn him, but to feel close to him. And she talked to him, out loud. She told him about her day, about the garden, about what the neighbors were doing, about the small good things she had noticed. Her daughter called one morning and heard her laughing in the kitchen. "Mama, who are you talking to?" "Your father." A pause. "Are you okay?" "I am better than okay. I am practicing." 6 months after George died, something shifted that Eleanor had not expected. People started coming to her, not because she advertised anything, not because she put up a sign, just because word traveled the way it does in small towns. Eleanor Anderson on Maple Street. She lost her husband, she went through hell, and somehow she is the most peaceful person anyone has seen in years. Go talk to her. A young woman came first, 29 years old, going through a divorce, sitting across from Eleanor at that kitchen table, crying into a cup of tea. Eleanor did not give her advice. She did not quote scripture or psychology. She just told her what George had told her. You cannot control what happens to you, but you can always control where you point your mind next. The young woman wiped her eyes. That sounds too simple. Eleanor smiled. The most powerful things always do. Then a man came, 50 years old, had just lost his job of 22 years, sitting in the same chair, same kitchen, same cup of tea. Eleanor told him the same thing, and then she added something. Every morning, when you wake up, your brain is going to hand you a list of everything that is wrong. That is its job. Your job is to hand it back and say, yes, but what is still right? Start there. Always start there. Word spread further. A local pastor heard about Eleanor. He asked her to speak at a community meeting. She almost said no. She was not a speaker. She was just an old woman who had learned something the hard way. But she went. She stood up in front of 40 people in a church hall and told them George's words, told them about the 5 minutes every morning, told them about the 3 small things, told them about turning a ship 1 degree at a time. When she finished, the room was completely silent. Then a man in the back row started clapping, and everyone followed. Afterward, a woman came up to her with tears streaming down her face. "I have been depressed for 3 years," she said. "I have tried medication. I have tried therapy, and you just said in 10 minutes what nobody has been able to say to me in 3 years. Eleanor took her hands. "It is not magic," she said. "It is practice, like a muscle. You train it every single day. Some days you will fail. Most days at the start, you will fail. But you show up again the next morning and you try again. That is all it is." Here is what research confirms about everything Eleanor was doing intuitively. A study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people who kept a daily gratitude journal, writing just 3 things they were thankful for each morning, showed a 25% increase in happiness levels within 3 weeks. Not 6 months. 3 weeks. A Harvard Medical School study found that positive thinking literally changes the physical structure of your brain. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for decision-making, focus, and emotional regulation, grows thicker in people who practice consistent positive thinking over time. And perhaps most powerfully, a study by the Mayo Clinic found that optimistic people live on average 11 to 15% longer than pessimistic ones. Not slightly longer, over a decade longer. Just from the quality of their thoughts. Eleanor lived to 84. Sharp, warm, and laughing until the very end. At her funeral, her daughter read a note Eleanor had written and left in George's old chair. It said, "I did not choose to lose him, but I chose every single day what to do with that loss. I chose to look for the light, not because the darkness was not real, but because the light was also real, and where you look is where you go." So here is what I want to leave you with today. You are going to wake up tomorrow morning and your brain is going to hand you a list. Worries, fears, things that went wrong, things that might go wrong, people who disappointed you, problems with no solution yet. That list is real. I am not asking you to pretend it is not, but before you pick that list up and carry it into your day, give yourself 5 minutes first. Lie still. Think of 3 things that are still right. Still good, still working, however small. The fact that you woke up, the fact that you have people who care about you, the fact that you are still here and still capable of change. Then get up and point your mind forward. Not because life is perfect, it is not. Not because the pain is not real, it is, but because where you point your mind is where your life goes. That is not a motivational phrase. That is neuroscience. That is biology. That is what Eleanor proved in a small kitchen in Tennessee with nothing but a cup of tea and a dead man's words she refused to forget. You have the same power she had. You always have. The question is whether you will use it tomorrow morning. If this story moved something in you, like this video right now and share it with one person who needs to hear it today. Subscribe for more stories like this every single week. And drop a comment telling me, what is one thing in your life right now that you can choose to see differently? I will be reading every single one. Because Eleanor taught me something too. Sometimes the most powerful thing one person can do is simply remind another person of what they already know.